right. So I guess before we dive into the main topic of today, which is around digital nomads, we'll just pause if anyone's got anything going on in the market that we need to be aware of or events that are coming up. I think who do we have? We have Patricia Rodriguez from Outvise had something she wanted to bring up.
Hi, I'm instead of Patricia.
All right.
So yeah, it's me. Yeah, finally she could not join. She's feeling like a bit sick. So here just wanted to invite all of you to our next webinar that is taking place. We organized together with John Younger. So that's why I want to announce it here, obviously. I'm gonna share quickly just some information so you can all be aware, if it's okay. Never shared anything here. Right. I mean, we have the webinar about talent shortage where we talk with John, we talk with Anita from Strategic Management Center from Europe, from the Netherlands, founder of TechRadar, Chris Bradford from Gamma Telecom from the UK, and Alex Clear, who is the co-founder of Outvise and who is really into digital transformation of work and these kind of things. So I wanted to invite all of you. It's going to take place on Zoom, 29th of November at 4 p.m. Spanish time. It's going to be like 10, I think, for the US, for the New York City. And here we basically it's a panel discussion where we will have topics as open talent and the rise of freelancing, how the companies can benefit from it. We're going to talk about different HR approaches to managing current teams, how to deal with the talent shortage, and how to manage your remote and digital workers. So I'm going to drop the link now here in the chat. So feel free to register if you can. Thanks a lot. Fantastic.
And I think everyone in the community knows John Younger is someone who is constantly out there promoting all the good that's happening in this marketplace and the role of freelancers and the things that people are doing, working with platforms, understanding what people are doing there, and also leading our effort as we get ready for the survey of the trusted partners. It looks like we're getting ready to go into beta mode with the first grouping of people there. So again, if you have questions as it relates to the trusted platform partner survey, and now I know why John calls it TP3. Let us know. Happy to speak up on that. And also, if people need any clarification, there is a very distinct separation between the trusted platform partner survey and the accreditation process. I think that had come up as a question point for some folks after the introduction last week. If you need further clarity, please reach out to me directly. I'm happy to have a conversation with anyone. Drop something in chat. I'll make sure to connect with you directly to have a conversation there. So we move on to digital nomads, and Steve King is always someone who brings us some quality research and some interesting perspectives and all things associated to freelancers, whether it's his work at MBO or the freelance work that he does on the side. Steve, always impressed with it. But I think before we do, I want to just maybe turn over to John Windsor. You've kind of been a digital nomad for a while here. So what can you tell us about your history of being a digital nomad?
I know, I find it so fascinating that it's got a name, right? So like back in the day, I was always trying to lie where I was. And in fact, it got so bad, I think in 2000, I sold a company called Sports and Fitness Publishing and went to a small town in Mexico because I wanted to try this thing called surfing. And, it was really amazing waves for the first week. And then it totally went flat. So it's a tiny little village called Sayulita, which has gotten to be pretty popular these days. And so my wife and I went around town with a real estate, with essentially another surf bum, looking for houses. And I wonder if we could afford a house. And we found this really cool house, couple blocks from the beach. And, we said, wow, we're really interested. Like, what would a down payment be on, this piece of property there? And so he said, it's $100, like the $100 down payment for the property. And so we were really psyched, but I was running a company at the time called Radar, and I'd gotten a contract to write a book. And so we planned on kind of, doing the digital nomad thing and living in Mexico. The problem was there was one tree on the beach where you could get cell phone service, and that was it. And in town, there were only seven phones in the whole village. There was one public phone. So I had a lot of the calls there. So when we were down there, I needed to write this book and connect. And so I needed to figure out, what do I do? Well, I'd heard that there was this guy from Canada who was financing his surf trips in a school bus, and he had absconded out of Canada a bunch of Hughes satellite dishes. And so he was actually financing his trip by selling satellite dishes across Latin America. So I found Brian. I bought a satellite dish for $6,000. We poured the cement on top of my roof of my house. We got it oriented. We went to the payphone, and we actually lied to Hughes Canada to say we were in northern Ottawa. Got the codes to set things up, and kind of oriented the satellite in the right way. And I was sat like I had internet connection in 2002. It was amazing. So much of my career, I've kind of always snuck away to Mexico and spent most of the winters there surfing and chasing waves. But I never really wanted to tell anybody that, right? Like, I'm trying to run a company and do things globally. And, so all the complications of how could I live on a beach and do this thing and be respected, which was a really crazy thing. Well, spending so much time in Sayulita over the last 25 years, I just find it super fascinating how much the town's exploded in the last few years, that all these people are all of a sudden saying, well, I'm a local and I moved here 6 months ago. But what I see super interesting from my perspective is all the guys that I've been surfing with for 25 years, they still live there full time, and they pay about $800 a month to live there, to go out to dinner every night, to, live a great life, surf every day. And I think what's happened in my perspective, at least in Sayulita, is that people have moved from places like New York, where they may have made $80,000 a year, but it cost them $85,000 a year. Now they can live in Sayulita and surf twice a day and pay $800 a month versus the $85,000 a year. And I find this kind of value arbitration part of digital nomads is a really, really interesting and intriguing part of it. Certainly something that I've always enjoyed. And it's so fun to see this new vibrancy from all these folks in Sayulita now. It's just changed the environment in a massive way, but it's brought a lot of new, interesting people to town, lots of, different kinds of conversations. You can't go to a coffee shop like everywhere else in the world now in Sayulita without like everybody being on their computer all day, doing their work, and then rushing out and jumping in the crowded surf break. But anyway, just wanted to share that story. I'm super intrigued with the conversation today because this is near and dear to my heart in a huge way. And I just love the fact that we can talk openly about this stuff, right? I was always skirting the issue and never telling anybody that this is how I worked. So it's nice to be out and open about all this great stuff and encouraging people to work in a new way. So thanks, Steve, for putting this together.
Yeah, and it's really interesting too, John, because as you extend into it, whether it's a state like Kerala in India, or it's Oklahoma City, or it's Saudi Arabia, or it's Barbados, where Rochelle's joining us from. You have all these markets that are saying, whoa, we got a different way to either keep our assets, the people we have in our market, or attract people to come in and make our economies change and shift. So Steve, I'm going to turn it over to you. I know you got a couple of special guests with you today. I'll let you do the intros.
Okay, thank you very much, John. Let me take a second here to share my screen. Did it get across okay?
Yep, you did.
Good. I'm Steve King, for those who don't know me. I'm a partner at Emergent Research. We're a research and consulting firm focused on the future of work and independent workers and so freelancers and so forth, which is why I'm here. And what I'm going to talk about today is a study we've been conducting for the last 5 years with MBO partners on digital nomads. And we started this prior to the pandemic, and now we're winding down through the pandemic, hopefully. Gives us a pretty good insight over what's happened with it. I'm joined today by three experts in the field. Rowena Hennigan is, I'll let them introduce themselves later, but she's an academic, researcher, consultant, and just a real expert on remote work in general and digital nomads and specifically. And Steve Sensorinsky, who is a digital nomad, but is also a copywriter, writer in general, video producer, and I believe is living in Croatia right now. And then McLean Robbins, who's the VP of marketing at MBO Partners, who we work with on this study. As you have, I'm going to do a quick presentation, then we're going to have a discussion with Steve and Rowena. If you have questions, raise your hand or enter them into the chat. McLean's going to be monitoring that for us, and we'll do our best to answer your questions. So with that, let's get going. A big part of the study is for us to understand the number of digital nomads out there. It is a U.S. study. We ask in a survey, we ask people who either consider themselves Americans or have recently resided in America is the easiest way to describe that. And what we've seen is a substantial increase in the number of digital nomads over the past couple of years. In fact, they're up 139% from 2019. And it was interesting in the course of this study, when we went from 2019 to 2020, and then the surveys are done in the summer each year. We weren't really sure. We thought maybe it would be flat or even down a little bit because of the pandemic. And of course, we were wrong. We saw a 49% increase that year. The next year in 2021, we were actually expecting an increase in the 15 to 20% range, but instead we got a 42% increase. And then in this last year, continued to grow up 9%. Probably the most interesting piece of this was the effect of the pandemic, which we thought, of course, people would stay home. And they did quit traveling internationally for the most part, but instead they went domestic. And so that's the numbers did increase. And when you get under the hood of that, clearly the main reason is a shift to remote work. And traditional job holders were basically unleashed from their offices. They were allowed to travel more and more. And what we saw, there was about 44% of digital nomads, about 44% were traditional job holders in 2019, but now they're 2/3. And so we've seen the huge increase happen with those with the old traditional jobs. We've seen a continued growth, decent growth of independent workers, of freelancers, independent consultants, et cetera. But the big jump has been by these traditional workers. And interesting to point out, we do ask these traditional workers, does your employer know if you're a digital nomad? And these numbers are a little shaky, we think, but about 40% say no, about 20% say maybe, and about 40% say yes. And so, John, not everybody's yet willing to admit that they're traveling around. The remote work thing is the primary driver, but a bunch of other things are going on that will help, we believe, continue to drive this forward in the future. Countries now are trying to attract, and cities are trying to attract digital nomads. Close to 50 countries, we think, have special visas for digital nomads. Remote technology is getting better. The size of this is leading to a support industry. And we'll talk about that a little bit later as we move through. In terms of who these folks are, they skew young and male, and they have from as long as we've been studying it. They've actually gotten a little younger. The Gen Z folks, the Gen Z folks are aged 10 to 25 right now, roughly. Plus, we're 10 to 25, given where we are in the year. They are very active travelers, and so their entrance into the workforce and their travel patterns have brought the average age down a little bit. But as you can see, we still get a decent amount of older folks. The two older generations are at about 36% of digital nomads, and about 1 in 10 are age 60 and above. And I should have said what we mean when we mean digital nomads. For us, we ask people if they consider themselves digital nomads. We then ask a series of screening questions to confirm that they actually are. And two key screening questions. One is, are they doing this by choice, and is it their choice, as opposed to their employer asking them to move around? And then to fit our description, the digital nomad has to tell us that they've visited at least 3 different places over the prior year. And so we do exclude people who just have one remote work location, like the many people here in San Francisco that go up to Lake Tahoe. So that's who they are. They skew male and female. Those numbers have been the same from the very first survey we did 5 years ago, and roughly the same. And they basically, they underrepresented are Hispanics, Latinos. African Americans are slightly overrepresented, and then Euro-Caucasians, which is our politically correct term for white people, are about roughly in line with the population. in all our the under skewing by Hispanics is common. The surveys in English, not, and so you tend to you do tend to under skew in most cases, depending upon what you're doing with that population group. One of the things that we find really interesting about digital nomads is they're highly satisfied with their work and lifestyle. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide because I want to go into it in more detail into the discussion, since we have two strong experts in this area. But when you look at them compared to how traditional job holders answer the question, they feel much better about their work. They feel much better about their life on average. And they actually have a higher level of satisfaction with their income, which is really interesting. If you dig under the hood of that, most digital nomads will tell us they're pretty happy with their income as long as it allows them to travel. So if they make enough to travel, when we actually look at the numbers, digital nomads on average earn less than either traditional job holders or freelancers and independent workers who aren't digital nomads. But despite that, they score higher in terms of satisfaction. It's not, there's a lot of challenges associated with being a digital nomad. And again, we'll go into these a bit later. Personal safety is a hard one to disaggregate between I don't feel safe for reasons beyond COVID and COVID, although when we go back to 2019, personal safety did not score nearly as high. So that's definitely a COVID effect. You look at loneliness and being away from family, I kind of lump those together in terms of loneliness. And then the third lump is sort of what is logistical and work. I mean, travel logistics, managing work and travel and time zone differences. And so there are a lot of challenges associated with being a digital nomad. And we're going to ask, but we'll talk about this in more depth in a minute. One of the reasons I wanted to present to this group is that digital nomads are heavy users of online talent marketplaces. This isn't a surprise. They're traveling. They tend to be, in addition to young, they tend to be tech savvy. On average, they're advanced users and power users of remote technology, and they're 50% more likely than the standard freelancer to actually say they have used an online talent platform over the past 12 months. And they also tend to use it more intensely, about 20% more likely to say they're using them frequently or as their primary source of clients. And so we have a group that I think is a really interesting target market for many of the people on this call who work for the talent marketplaces. The other side of it is we found with our client base over the years, if you study power users, you quickly learn a lot about what you can offer, particularly if you can make it simpler, what you can offer your regular customers. And these are basically power users of both remote work technology and of the online platforms. We have a group, we ask every year people who aren't digital nomads if they are planning to become a digital nomads. The actual question is we ask, will you or may you become a digital nomad over the next 2 to 3 years? And we get huge numbers. Now, when you ask Americans in particular, but anybody in a survey around the world, aspirational questions about what they may or may not do in the future, questions about things that are cool or trendy, you get a lot of false positives. And so these numbers, 72 million in 2022, up from 54 million in 2019, it's still a little early and it's hard to actually figure out exactly how many of these people will do it, but it looks like from our work, it'll be somewhere between 8 and 11% of these people, of that 72 million, will actually become a digital nomad over the next 2 to 3 years. And that's just an estimate so far. We still got some work to do to fully quantify that. And that's why we call them armchair digital nomads. And there's this spectator sport almost of watching videos and YouTubes and TikToks and reading blogs. And they're particularly the van lifers, or people who travel around in vans. They have some, the videos usually have a couple, usually young, usually attractive, in some exotic location, generally doing yoga with their dog or even a goat or others. And that has just become a very popular spectator sport. And so there's just a lot of positive press and a lot of positive online stuff. They, of course, don't show the downsides, but it has turned it into a very popular thing to follow. And I think, it's something that most, you get to 72 million Americans. I mean, that's quite an aspirational level. And that will help drive the trend going forward. And we do expect continued growth, although we're already at 16.9 million. There is a logical topping out of how many people can actually do this at any time. And the other thing that's important to note is that the digital nomad world has a lot of churn. Most digital nomads, according to our research, do it for anywhere from 6 months to 3 or 4 years, and then go back to a more traditional lifestyle. They may return to being a digital nomad later, but we're seeing a lot of churn throughout. So the study itself is out, and McLean will hopefully enter this into the chat. But here's the
I put it
URL.
in. It's like 3 links up, guys. You got it.
And let me just stop here. I've been rambling on for a bit. Stop for questions, and then we'll move on to the discussion part. Are there any questions so far based on the data? Okay, we'll go ahead on. I'm really pleased with who we have today, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves in a second. But Rowena Hennigan is a digital nomad expert, a remote work expert, an academic, a consultant, really understands this thing, a digital nomad herself, and also has a course on LinkedIn for digital nomads. It has many thousands of users, and so quite the digital nomad expert. Steve Sarinsky is a digital nomad himself. I pulled up this picture of him from his CNBC page, where he's a contributor, he's a writer, he's a video producer, and I believe Steve is living in Croatia right now. And my only comment about Croatia is that Split, Croatia is a city I'd never heard of until about 18 months ago. My kids went there, and since then, I don't think a week goes by where I don't hear about Split, Croatia. So someday I'm going to have to go see it. So with that, let me bring them into the conversation. And Rowena, could you please introduce yourself? And then we'll get to you, Steve.
A million, Steve King. Welcome. Thank you so much, everyone. Rowena, or Ro for short. Good afternoon from Zaragoza in the north of Spain. It is an Irish accent, you might have guessed from the name. So buenas tardes, tough ultra oath. So I do know Denise Broder. She was born down the road from me in Galway. It's a pleasure to be here. And I've heard a lot about this group. I've put 2 and 2 together. Denise mentioned this group, Steve King, maybe a year and a half ago to me. And as we've been moving through this week, I've realized it's the same group. So it's a pleasure to be here. You can look me up on LinkedIn. I've shared the course. So a gift for all of you is, if you would like access to the course and a month's free access to LinkedIn Learning, hit me up with a DM message, connect with me on there, and I will give you access to the course. So my story is in around 2007, 2008, a bit like John's story, John Windsor. He was chasing surf. I was chasing snow down under, actually in New Zealand, and with my snowboard, and I had a laptop, and wherever I could find a bit of connection, I was pretending to work back to an office in Auckland and back to Australia. So back then it was the early start of me remote working and traveling. Now I have a family and I still manage to nomad. We've been, my daughter's 8 and she's been to 11 countries so far. And she's done 2 years of traveling in her, almost 2 years of traveling in her short years. And we do it part-time. And so the thing that's been interesting to me as a remote work expert and pioneer, I have just found it fascinating how when we loosen up the definition of what a nomad is, particularly when we think that maybe some nomads have a home base, maybe some nomads pack their stuff in with their parents or a family member, or maybe they sublet an apartment and then they go off traveling. And then we start to open up our mind to what a nomad is, because nomad mindset is something that's really interesting. It's about being able to be globally mobile. And I'm not going to get in as an academic to the various definitions because I can critique them all day long because I think they're too limiting. And it's my personal strong opinion working in this space that certainly to take advantage of this market, you also need to be open-minded to the definition because it's emerging and changing so fast. So a few things I'm going to highlight quickly before we go in and go through the questions, Steve, is that part on geo-arbitrage and looking for a cheaper way of living for either summer part of the year if you're globally mobile. So I think that's a really interesting angle. And I think it hopefully answers Ashley's question a little bit straight away because nomads tend to move for that benefit if they can. So I'm going to throw that out there. As a challenge or another balance to the definition, think about passport privilege as well. So we need to be very careful from an inclusion perspective. And I'm joyously holding a European passport, and I know that's a privilege. Maybe for some of you on this call, it's a particular privilege as well. So I'm going to factor that into your thinking about this whole emerging area and what markets are coming in. And also, I want to encourage you via some of my channels and communities to connect with individual nomad stories, not what Steve said, the Instagrammers that are falling off the side of cliffs to take the picture of the goat or whatever it is while they're posing in their yoga pose. The real nomads, because in the last couple of years, that's what I've dedicated, thanks to my partner, a lot of my time and research into visiting nomad villages, being to Croatia, meeting the wonderful Steve that's on, meeting the nomad communities in Albania and Bosnia. I'm going to one that's an hour and a half down the road here in Spain next week. I've been to Madeira. I've been to various places in Asia to meet the nomads and find out exactly who they are, because a lot of them are just like you and me. So that's the other piece I want to start off with, and I'm going to hand over to Steve.
Thanks. Other Steve. I'm going to call you Other Steve.
Other Steve.
Please introduce yourself, and also tell me what your last name is again. So did I mispronounce it, or did I get it close to right?
No, you got it right. And I used to just tell everyone they got it right, just because it was a nice way to give people brownie points, but that was genuinely correct. So you get brownie points and you were right. So yeah, first of all, thank you for having me here. It's really a pretty remarkable group, and thanks Rowena specifically for having me pop into mind, or popping into her mind, I guess. We were picking olives very recently together in Croatia. So she's not lying. She is all over the place doing the thing with everybody, and nomad herself. So it's very cool, and I long for more time in person with Rowena because she's so cool. So thank you. As for me, I'm from Cleveland, Ohio originally. I've never actually had a traditional job ever in my life. I've never had an office job, so I don't even know, I wouldn't know how to go back to something. I was working in video production, as you mentioned. That was my sort of previous career. COVID made me into a writer, and it was through the online platform that we're going to talk about that shift was even possible. So that actually, when I look back at 2020, that is a very positive year for me, oddly enough. And 2021, another pandemic year, let's say, was also extremely positive. It sucks that was the cost of having a mindset shift, but that was what sparked change for me. I lived in New Zealand for a year in the past. I worked for cruise lines for 5 years, was directing music videos for people, artists on The Voice, for tourism companies, for corporate clients, and then shifted to, I had my own company doing that, stopped doing that, was a digital nomad with my initial video company. The pandemic crushed that, and then now I was doing 1 month in places, and we'll kind of talk about, through a conversation that comes up, figuring out your sort of lifestyle in the digital nomad space. As Rowena mentioned, there's many ways to do this, and so I would be what's called, in my mind at least, a slow man. I don't like moving particularly fast anymore. And I pretty much am based exclusively in Croatia now, even though I did travel for the last 7 months. So it's a mixed bag. But that's a brief and very chaotic introduction.
Thanks, Steve. And to the audience, Steve's one of his specialties is writing about SaaS companies, I believe. And
actually, one quick thing. So the MBO research, randomly, I wrote an article for a Slovenian magazine last year about digital nomads, and I used your research, or I made your research in it, and I just realized that connection now. I Googled it, turned my camera off to Google it, and I'm like, holy cow, I used this from the last year's report. So pretty cool, pretty cool.
That's great. Yeah, so he says SaaS is one of your specialties, right? So you got a bunch of SaaS potential clients here, and if you're a potential client, reach out to them.
Please do.
Let me. So I wanted to dive into one of the topics I mentioned before, which was the fact that the digital nomads score so high in terms of satisfaction and life goals. And I'd like to get sort of each of your perspectives on that. But Rowena, one of my issues is that because life's so good when you're a digital nomad, or is that because the people that choose to be digital nomads are more likely to respond that way? And so since you're like the ethnographic digital nomad star, give us your insights on their attitudes and motivations and why they're being so thrilled with it.
Well, the thing is that I guess we have to look at it from a couple of different perspectives. The motivation to go off and adopt this lifestyle, to take your remote work and travel, to maybe do that for extended periods of time. If we look at the research about competencies for remote work, and one thing we know about digital nomads is they're all remote workers. They can't be doing it otherwise without their computer. And the research shows that people like that are very self-organized, right? Their attention to detail. I'll share in a minute that research that aligns remote workers with these competencies of being really good at planning and being organized. So therefore, we can draw the line potentially that someone who plans this, and particularly because most people have to get a visa, not all of them, but a percentage of them, if we're looking at an American sample, that possibly would need a special visa. You need to be quite self-organized and self-directed. With that in mind, you're probably going to take quite a bit of time or some time to figure out your motives before you go, get yourself organized. And therefore, you're potentially going to be quite good at it. And Steve, when we spoke in the briefing session, looking at churn and why people quit, we'll come on to in a minute. But I think because if we look at the competencies for good remote work, which is how nomads fund their travel, those competencies shows that effective remote workers are often very self-organized. They've got self-direction, they've got motivation. If we add that into then combining the desire to travel, the motivation, and following that through, I think that can explain why they seem to be quite satisfied in the scores that you showed.
Interesting.
So I'll share that. I'm going to share that research just now, if you give me 1 minute, because I have it here ready to go in the chat. Fire ahead. Keep asking.
All right. So Steve, are you, I mean, I realize now I shouldn't be a digital nomad because I'm disorganized and can't work well on the road and have other issues. What about yourself? Did you hear yourself being described there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you have to be. It's a requirement. You can't disappoint clients routinely and still have clients. So you have to prioritize organization in the process. You can be disorganized in many other facets of your life while still maintaining organization in this particular one. So for me, I would never call myself an organized person, but with work, I'm very much like, I know to be where I want to be, to have the freedom to travel around and to experience things, I have to get X, Y, Z done. And I look at that as a sort of non-negotiable, and it forces my let's say organizational muscle to work in that instance and in that pretty much one space of life. So I heard myself being described in that sense.
Okay, great. I'd like to shift gears just a little bit and stay with you, Steve, for now. The audience here, a lot of them are actually work for platforms that provide online talent platforms that connect freelancers with customers, clients, and that describes you. And I noticed that I saw one of your videos on Upwork, the work you do with Upwork. So I thought we'd take this opportunity. You could give us the pluses and minuses of these online platforms. And this is your opportunity to tell them what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong from a digital nomad perspective.
Yeah, well, for the pluses, I will say that the pluses will outweigh whatever minuses I get into, because without the platform being that, I wouldn't be doing this. So like they're clearly on the side of doing well. The main thing is, first of all, is access to jobs and just companies that I wouldn't have had access to otherwise, and people that are making hiring decisions in those companies. You could go on LinkedIn and find these people, but they're not hot leads when you find them in LinkedIn. When they're in Upwork, where that's the only platform I use, that's invaluable. I wouldn't be able to have that. Then that, obviously, we just call it centralization. So centralization of those people and those companies. The fact that contracts, billing, invoicing, payment, whatever is taken care of, so I don't have to do that, is remarkable. And then the scope of the types of work. So I'm in writing, but that doesn't, there's a bazillion types of writing that you can do. There's email writing, there's Amazon product pages, there's landing pages, there's copy. I wouldn't have been able to try so many different things with so many different types of companies in such a short time without platforms. And there's actually really good clients on these platforms. People will often complain. I'm talking specifically about Upwork, because that's the only one I have real familiarity with and deep knowledge on. That there's never good clients. You can't find anyone that pays well, and it's just this race to the bottom. That's not true. There are good clients. My longest term clients that pay the highest are from there, and it's not insignificant. So those are the pluses that I think Upwork does well, and I'm sure Fiverr does that sort of thing well, and the other ones do that sort of thing well also. As for the cons, I mean, you have fees in perpetuity forever, no matter how long you have a client. So that's annoying. I know they're doing ongoing billing services, so I sort of get that, but at a certain point, it's like, okay, like you're just sending an invoice now. Like if I've been with you for this long, can we go to zero at some point? And then I think for me, getting started was pretty difficult. I had to use a lot of resources outside of Upwork. There just wasn't a lot of resources there to learn from. Now there's tons. To their credit, they've really done well with that, but it's really frustrating. It's really soul crushing. You have to teach yourself how to do proposals, and it's a good lesson in owning a business and running a business. So I value that now, but it sucked when it was in real time. And then you have to figure out your strategic approach also to that sort of thing. So you're not competing on pricing alone, which does make a race to the bottom. If you don't figure out that you have to compete in a different way, that takes time. So a lot of these things are sort of user related, but they could probably be helped by more, let's say, hand holding a little bit through the platforms themselves. And then with Upwork, you're stuck on a platform. No platform wants you to leave. They want you to continue paying. So they both encourage you to be on there and then penalize you if they find out that you're taking clients off the thing. So,
Sure.
those are, yeah. That's how I see it.
Well, I find soul crushing is kind of a scary attribute in terms of your description of the process.
You have to be willing to, I think, suffer to have a business that works and figure it out. I mean, like someone can tell you how to do things, but until you make all these mistakes, but there's no one there to like comfort you, which in life it's like that too, but it's like you're doing it by yourself, not in a company setting. So that sort of thing, you have to have a sort of mental strength to keep pushing through on your own.
Rowena, is that what you hear in your interviews and discussions? Is that about platforms?
I don't hear it specifically. I mean, platforms get mentioned. I think there's a broader issue there, and I might get up on my high horse soapbox for a minute. How we're not preparing young people to, and I can say that at my age, I might sound old, to work in the real world with the proper skills needed to use a lot of digital technology, be entrepreneurs, be freelancers. I can see a few notes, so maybe you agree with me. And I was just typing as Steve was saying that, interestingly, Steve King, that from an education perspective, the platforms are educating users to be freelancers, but where's the one-to-one support? Right? Because we're then assuming that everything is, those people are just consuming that information, those learners, those users. So again, as with an academic hat on, with an educator hat on, I find that interesting, that, and with some of Steve's sharing, which I've heard, it can be lonely, it can be isolating if you're running your own business, and therefore using platforms in whatever ways or means, how are we supporting people to do that, and could there be an opportunity for the platforms to look at that? So I don't know if that's something anyone else in the group would like to comment on, but I find an interesting connection there in terms of my experience with young people and educating them in remote work.
Yeah, I chime in on that one, Rowena. This is McLean with MBO. We fund this research here. We had a thesis a few years ago that people wanted the one-to-one support. And so we spun up a program and charged for it. And we found that some people did, but what they really wanted was jobs. And so they joined the platform saying they wanted one-to-one support, and what they wanted was one-to-one support getting a job with one of our clients. We run the largest high-scale freelance marketplace in the States. The second thing we found is that when we respun that service for people to connect with each other, other independents, to fix what we thought was the loneliness factor, it did really well during COVID. And then when it wasn't COVID and everybody got busy again, they once again went back to wanting jobs and didn't want to pay to connect with each other, which we thought was really interesting because the communities that were robust had sort of stuck that way. But they keep coming to us for advice, which we think is interesting. So I'd be curious if any of the other platform folks had a thought on that one. But just to note, Steve, we're getting a lot of questions in the chat too. So not to stop.
Excuse me?
We're getting a lot of questions in the chat.
Oh, well, why don't we go to a couple questions because we're running out of time. So
yeah, all right. So first one's first. We have one in the back asking if the recession and the pending recession was highlighting the growth of digital nomads or if it was stopping it or a net neutral impact. So Steve, I think that's a research one for you.
Well, Europe is sort of tilting in, and it's not yet clear. Most people think we're going to tilt in. So I don't into a recession. But overall, our economic in the US, the economy grew pretty robustly in the last quarter. Unemployment's very low. So I don't think the recession has yet had an impact. Unfortunately, we don't really have good data going back to the prior recession. So it seems to me a recession would have an impact, a negative impact, because freelancers tend to get hit hard early in a recession and then they tend to pick up later. So I think it will have an impact, but it's too early to tell.
Totally. And then we're seeing a couple questions come in on correlating the rise of nomads, and I'm gonna combine a couple questions here. Rise of nomads and the rise of the platform economy overall. Do we see the two as correlated? Is it easier for people to be nomads because platforms are growing? I think anybody could answer that one. Rowena, I like the face.
But I'm being honest, but I've done a lot of nomading on this side of the world. I wonder, Steve, because I sent out, when Steve King said, who do you know that uses platforms? So Steve in Croatia, I actually had to rack my brain from maybe the 300 or 400 nomads I've even met in the last 6 months at various group events. So I don't know, even in your travels, how many. I mean, again, we're looking to Europe, so let's clarify it. But I just wonder, because why let Steve answer in 1 second, because a lot of the other research I'm seeing is showing that companies are supporting nomadism with corporate policies and different work from anywhere policies like Airbnb. So that's on the rise as well. So unless those people have side gigs, maybe the correlation will start to change. So Steve in Croatia?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to meet people that are taking their already existing jobs remote. I do know people that are using platforms as well. I feel like it definitely helps. And it's trying to think. I've been asked personally by a bunch of people to help them out on their sort of Upwork path and freelancing that way. But I think the preference, the easiest way for people to get into it is because of COVID and because jobs have been much more open to letting people work from wherever they want. That is much more, I think, to Rowena's point, much more what's motivating it. I think it's then secondary is the platforms, but they're still massive. I still meet people. Yeah, so it's tough to say with any definitive statement though.
Great. Brandon, it looks like we're near our
I just love throwing one comment here because I started my first company in '85, started 6 companies and sold those 6 companies and then a bunch of other stuff. But what I'm totally blown away by is the amount of resources it takes to start a company, right? Like back in the day, I was in the magazine publishing business, and it took, hundreds of us to put a magazine out monthly, writers and editors, and then all these suppliers to just get information out into the world. And now it's, one writer on a platform of some kind, just hitting the print button or the launch button out there. So I think what's happened is that digital technology has allowed and compressed the ability for people to start companies, and so we have this whole generation of new micro entrepreneurs. And this is I feel like platforms are really important to, like you said, Steve, find jobs, learn things. We're still in the early days of this kind of creating the right foundations, and certainly we need to do that culturally too, right? With the right government policies and tax policies and all these other things. But to me, it's really this digital technologies allowed anybody that is entrepreneurial at all to jump in and be an entrepreneur at a much lower hurdle than it used to be 25 years ago, right? It's so much easier to get a business off the ground and start earning income as a solopreneur than having to spool up a whole team of folks to do that. But yet I think we're still at the nascent stage of what resources do those folks need, like you, Steve, like how does a platform do the right thing and make sure that, it takes the right kind of cut up front to introduce you, but then, slows it down to make sure that you have that relationship one-on-one. So I'm really psyched about this. And I think there's a lot of stuff that goes hand in hand, but it's really, to me, the underlying cause is the idea that, we're here having a call with a global community. Everybody's doing what they want to do and do, living the life that they want to live. No longer is work a place to go, but a thing to do. And in that context, in that construct, it's just really awesome to see that people have the freedom to do what they really want to do and fit work into their life instead of fitting life into their work.
Yeah, that's great, John. And just a call to action and Steve's comment to all of the platforms that are out there. If the only service you're providing is payroll and billing, be thinking about what the reaction is on the back end of it. We've got to understand the community that we're serving. What are their needs, whether it's starting the business, whether it's expanding the business, whether it's strictly the payroll and billing, and how do we make sure that services that we offer are accommodating to that. And candidly, MBO is one of the companies that does have different models there that fits into it. So I know Brandon put it in the chat of a thank you to MBO for the research that was there and for sharing it. We'll reference our next call coming up, Gloat. I think on our last call, we had referenced that Gloat Live was going on a couple weeks ago, and we're going to have Jeff Schwartz come in. They had 3,000 people from 85 countries on the line for their Gloat Live event. So we're excited about what they can share, what they learned. I think there were some interesting things that I heard in that, kind of even going back to the start of our conversation today, where I heard one company declaring that you should flatten wages for every worker, regardless of where they are geography-wise. They have one set rate for each country by role, which certainly makes for good opportunity if you're a digital nomad and can go to a place where you have living arbitrage. You can make a whole lot more money along the way. So we're going to learn some more things. Appreciate everyone taking the time out. Rowena, Steve, thank you for sharing your perspectives. As digital nomads, it's always good to hear from the front line. Thanks all. Look forward to seeing you again.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Great job, Steve.
Bye.